Andrea Stella has just exploded with one of the strongest public statements of the entire season after the FIA disqualified both Norris and Piastri in Las Vegas for a microscopic floor violation that most teams never even saw coming. New evidence shows that the skid blocks on both McLarens measured below the legal limit by margins smaller than a strand of hair, and the FIA enforced the rule with scientific precision that stunned the paddock. This decision did not only delete their race results. It destroyed their championship momentum in an instant and created one of the biggest controversies the sport has seen in 2025. And before we break down exactly what Stella told the FIA, make sure you subscribe, because the next chapters of this championship battle are about to get even more explosive. The foundation of the Las Vegas controversy emerged the moment the FIA confirmed the exact measurements taken from the underside of both McLaren cars. According to the official report, the plank beneath every Formula One car must maintain a minimum thickness of 9 mm. This standard exists to prevent teams from lowering their cars excessively and gaining aerodynamic benefit from increased ground effect. When the FIA measured the underside of Piastri's car, they recorded values of 8.96, 8.74 and 8.90. These readings demonstrated that the plank had worn beyond the legal tolerance and had done so in multiple reference zones. Because the tool used by inspectors offers accuracy to 1/1000th of a millimeter, the values carried full credibility and left no space for interpretation. Norris's car produced similar measurements and confirmed that the issue was not isolated to a single accident or isolated component. The FIA documented readings of 8.88 and 8.93. This meant that both cars operated below the minimum thickness and therefore fell outside the parameters required by the technical regulations. The stewards repeated the procedure in the presence of McLaren personnel, and each repeated measurement returned the same outcome. The consistency of the readings gave the FIA complete certainty that the floor of each car had experienced excessive wear. Once those values remained below 9 mm, the legal framework of the technical rulebook mandated the same conclusion every time. The significance of the violation became clearer once the FIA explained the purpose of the plank. It prevents aerodynamic engineers from exploiting low ride heights without compromising the safety or fairness of the sport. If a car runs too low, it gains additional downforce in high-speed corners and obtains improved stability through ground effect. Even small reductions in plank thickness can offer measurable advantage. This is why the FIA has historically applied absolute enforcement to this component. The rule does not evaluate intention or circumstance. It examines the measurement alone. If the plank measures below 9 mm by any margin, the car must be disqualified. For McLaren, the impact of this decision was immediate and severe. Norris had finished second in the race and Piastri fourth. Those results would have delivered 21 championship points and dramatically strengthened the team's position in the title hunt. Instead, those points disappeared entirely. The standings were recalculated, and the report shows that the removal of those results shifted the balance of the championship overnight. Norris's lead, which would have expanded significantly, instead shrank to only 24 points, while both Piastri and Verstappen moved into equal standing behind him. One technical inspection transformed the outlook of the season. The FIA emphasized that the measurements were not subjective assessments taken under uncertain conditions. They were clear, concrete, and repeatable values recorded in a controlled environment after the race. The stewards also referenced prior enforcement history, confirming that identical violations had produced identical penalties for other teams earlier in the season. Because the rule had always been applied with rigid consistency, the FIA could not deviate from precedent. McLaren were made fully aware that the absence of intent does not alter the legal status of the car. The only question the rule asks is whether the minimum thickness has been maintained. As the findings were read out, Stella and the McLaren delegation began to understand the full scale of the problem. The values did not fall near the boundary. They fell beneath it. The FIA had used an instrument capable of measuring thickness to a precision beyond what the human eye can distinguish. Once those numbers were printed in the report, the outcome became irreversible. The disqualification of both drivers did not come from misinterpretation or debate. It came from a measurement taken beneath each car that exposed a breach of one of the most unforgiving regulations in the entire sport. Andrea Stella entered the late-night FIA hearing determined to explain why McLaren believed the circumstances of the Las Vegas weekend should be taken into account. He began by emphasizing that the circuit produced extreme vertical loading across its longest straights. The bumps and compressions were far stronger than expected, which forced the floor of the car into repeated contact with the asphalt. Stella argued that this was not a setup designed to gain an illegal advantage. Instead, it was a consequence of a new street circuit that produced unpredictable forces. However, the FIA made clear that the plank rule exists precisely because circuits with unusual behavior can encourage unintentional low running, which is why the regulation is written as an absolute measurement. Stella continued by highlighting the lack of accurate preparation during practice. The team lost critical track time due to weather disruptions and drainage issues that forced repairs to the circuit. This prevented McLaren from validating ride height levels under proper race conditions. He explained that the team entered the Grand Prix with less data than usual, which increased the chance of misjudging how the plank would wear across a full fuel load. But the FIA responded that technical rules cannot shift based on the quality or quantity of practice laps. A car must remain legal at all times, even when a weekend unfolds in imperfect or chaotic conditions. Another focal point of Stella's argument involved Piastri's lap 1 contact, which the document acknowledges. Stella suggested that this early incident may have caused floor movement or structural flex that accelerated plank were beyond what the team expected. He did not deny that the final measurement sat below the legal limit, but he argued that the cause should matter when the difference measured was no greater than a fraction of a millimeter. The FIA rejected this possibility by explaining that accidental damage cannot be considered when determining legality. If exceptions were made for one scenario, they would be demanded for all. The plank rule would lose the clarity required for consistent enforcement. One of Stella's most passionate points centered on the belief that McLaren did not seek any performance advantage from the plank wear. He emphasized that the team had no motive to run the cars artificially low and that the margins recorded were too small to create measurable gain. Stella argued that the regulation should differentiate between deliberate exploitation and unexpected mechanical consequences. The FIA responded that such distinctions cannot be controlled fairly. Once intent becomes part of the equation, teams gain the ability to justify violations on subjective grounds, which would undermine the credibility of technical inspection. The rule remains absolute precisely to prevent such ambiguity. The FIA's defense of the ruling relied heavily on the precision of the measurement process. The report confirms that the instrument used to inspect the plank was calibrated to detect thickness variations down to 1/1000th of a millimeter. The readings were repeated several times and observed directly by McLaren personnel. Because the values never changed, the stewards gained complete confidence that the car had indeed operated below the minimum height. Stella recognized that this level of precision left him with no avenue for appeal. The measurement was not a judgment call but a recorded value repeated without deviation. This is what made the ruling feel like an injustice to Stella. The team believed they were being punished disproportionately for a violation that had occurred under unpredictable conditions and produced no deliberate benefit. The FIA believed it was enforcing the rule exactly as intended. This clash between the engineer seeking context and the regulator enforcing absolutes produced one of the most intense confrontations of the season. Stella left the hearing with respect for the process but with a clear message for the future. He wanted Formula One to consider whether a rule measured in thousandths of a millimeter should carry the same penalty as deliberate technical manipulation. The turning point of the Las Vegas weekend emerged when the FIA recalculated the championship standings after removing both McLaren results from the final classification. According to the official document, Norris would have left Las Vegas with a commanding total of 408 points had his second-place finish stood. Instead, the disqualification reduced him to 390. This shift opened the door for both Piastri and Verstappen, who landed on 366 points apiece. The report shows clearly how a single technical ruling transformed what should have been a controlled championship into a volatile three-way battle. From McLaren's perspective, the drama lay not only in the loss of points but in the manner in which those points disappeared. The team had executed a clean race strategy, delivered strong pace, and avoided major errors on track. Yet none of that mattered once the inspectors recorded plank were beneath the legal threshold. Stella described internally that the sting of the penalty came from watching a weekend of flawless execution undone by a measurement taken in the quiet of the post-race room rather than by anything that had occurred in the roaring lights of the circuit. It was a moment that highlighted how Formula One can turn instantly from triumph to crisis. The FIA ruling created shockwaves because it did not simply adjust the competitive order. It rewrote the narrative heading into the final rounds of the season. With the championship now balanced tightly between three drivers, the paddock understood that Las Vegas had become a defining moment. Stella saw how the psychological momentum shifted immediately. Norris had expected to gain control of the title race. Instead, he saw both of his rivals close the gap to within a single result. The clean margin he believed he had secured collapsed in the span of a few printed measurements. What amplified the drama is that Piastri's and Norris's violations came from different sets of circumstances but produced identical consequences. Piastri had experienced early contact in the race, which Stella believed may have contributed to extra vibration and increased wear. Norris completed the race without such incidents yet still fell below the threshold. The FIA explained in the document that identical penalties must be applied regardless of cause. This approach created a scenario where two drivers lost everything not because of what they did but because of what the rule demands. The Giro Drammatico also came from how undeniable the readings were. The FIA repeated each measurement multiple times with the team present and obtained the same numbers in every cycle. This eliminated any chance of equipment error or procedural inconsistency. The document states that the instrument used can detect thickness variations to 1/1000th of a millimeter. This precision left no room for debate and no margin for interpretation. The drama grew because everyone involved understood that the penalty had been triggered by a measurement so small it felt unreal, yet so precise it was legally irrefutable.